All right, welcome everyone. It's just a couple minutes before noon. We'll get started here shortly. Okay, I have the top of the hour. My name is Jim Rogers from Dawood Engineering, and we'd like to welcome you to the Municipal Mapping webinar. This is the final in our summer series of webinars. We appreciate you joining us today and hope that you were able to also join us for some of our previous topics on survey technology, ADA design, and other GIS topics. If you missed those, you can certainly contact us for recordings of those previous webinars. This series is also being recorded today, so if you have a colleague you'd like to share this with, you may certainly let us know. We'll be glad to give you a link to the recording when this is concluded. I'd like to introduce our panel today. We have with us today John Miserak, our Director of Planning and Economic Development, Jody Gosselin, our Director of Geospatial Technologies, and Tim Woodfield, our GIS Specialist in our Sturbridge, Massachusetts office. And we'll be talking today about municipal planning. As I mentioned, this is the final in our summer series of webinars. We hope you'll stay tuned to future announcements on similar projects that we'll be doing so we can share more of our expertise and knowledge with you all, and hope that it prompts some good questions from you all. So we're very happy to have a good audience of participants here today. We want to encourage you to ask questions. We'll be using the Q&A tab. If you click that at the right of your panel bar, you can enter a question there, and we'll get to all of those questions at the end of the discussion after we go through our prepared panel questions. So with that, we'll get started. I'd like to start with my first question for John Miserak. John, we're talking today about municipal mapping, and I wanted to ask you, how does the mapping of assets like transportation, utilities, and facilities help a municipality to plan?
Sure, Jim. There's really two answers to that. The first one I'll focus on is from the budgetary perspective, and the second one is just from true planning or economic development. Being able to map assets that include infrastructure, stormwater, wastewater, other utilities, streets and roads, curbs, sidewalks, and park assets, are to name a few. It's important to be able to have all of that information at your fingertips and being able to understand the years they were constructed, what some of the maintenance requirements may need to be, so that the staff and the elected officials can adequately plan on a year-to-year basis the different types of maintenance and expansion projects that they may need. This becomes particularly important at this time of the year as municipal departments are starting to think through their municipal budgets, and the elected officials will be evaluating that as we move closer to the end of the calendar year here in 2020. So really being able to use it from a management perspective and budgetary perspective is critically important. But it also can be used by communities to really analyze different types of data to plan for and help move forward community and economic development projects, understanding where growth trends happen to be in their community and where that infrastructure happens to be providing transportation or other utility type things to those end users, the residents or the businesses, is really important. And being able to analyze that and then being able to chart courses to move forward for where does new roads need to be laid out, where does new utility lines need to be placed, where do we need new parks, especially in this COVID environment where so many people are outside doing recreational activities because we're so limited. Being able to understand where parks are at and rails and trails and so forth through the community, it's really important for municipal governments to understand what the needs are for their people and be able to use in a geospatial environment this data to be able to make decisions as to where they see their community moving in 2, 3, 5, 7, 10 years from now, and as they move forward in the future.
Thanks, John. We're going to be looking at a lot of those tool sets for the staff internally and for elected officials, but what about for the public and other stakeholders? What's the value of having these types of tools available?
It's a great question. Local government officials a lot of times spend a considerable effort trying to communicate with their constituents, with the business owners, with the residents that live in the community, with landowners, and being able to use maps and geospatial technology to be able to convey data, initiatives, projects, and things that they're looking to move forward is a great tools to be able to convey this in an easily understandable and easily digestible platform. And so as community officials are working on where the next development may occur, or where their next infrastructure improvement may need to occur, or where they may be working on a wastewater line during the next 2 months and need to detour traffic, or just being able to convey to a potential business where the opportunities are in the community for their commercial development to be relocated. That type of information being able to be conveyed geospatially really provides, again, that platform that's easily understandable and easily digestible by really anybody out there in the community.
All right, thanks, John. We're certainly seeing that importance in public involvement and how rapidly that's changing, especially as we've gone through this environment over the last 6 months where we're all working remotely in some capacity, and having these kind of digital tools is of great importance from a public involvement perspective. I'd like to turn it over to Jody here. Jody, we talked about why this is useful and important for municipalities to use. Can you explain some of the tools we use from a GIS perspective to showcase things like land use and planning?
Yeah, absolutely. So the key really to showcase anything with GIS is to start by geo-enabling your information. And as we've explored in this webinar series, GIS really is the tool that you can't live without, but you just might not know it yet. We're using GIS in our everyday lives, both in the professional setting and in our personal lives, more and more frequently. So you might not realize it, but when you do a Google search, or you ask a question on your phone to Siri, so say you're asking for pizza locations, you're typically requesting a spatial query to be done, or a GIS analysis, and those results are location-specific results. So the expectation now is that spatial context. So the key to showcasing anything with GIS is to start with geo-enabling your information. So in any industry, this is applicable, but ask yourself the questions: what information do you use most often? Are you often needing to share that information? And are you often waiting on updates from someone else to get a full picture of your information? And then with all of that, would it be helpful to see how that information exists geographically, so on a map? And I really like using the example of a phone book to discuss how geo-enabling works and the benefits of it. So if you think about a phone book and how maybe 2 decades ago, we all used to have those in our homes. It was a vital source of information. And I know at my house, it was the command center of our kitchen. We had it on the coffee table or the kitchen table with dog ears and notes written all over it. And if we needed any information, we had to look it up there. And as a kid, I was fascinated to just learn about my community by doing random things like looking for everyone with my last name, or going to the back in the directory and just getting a listing of businesses, seeing the restaurants, seeing which ones had menus. So it was a great source of information, but it was static and it was just confined to what was provided in that printout. So there's a lot of limitations there. There's no geographic context. So you don't know where everyone with your last name lives in your community. You don't know where those businesses are in relation to you. And you're also confined to just the information in your area code. And when I was growing up, we lived on the border of where the area code split. So we didn't get phone book information for the next area code. So geographically, I wasn't seeing what was near me. I was just seeing what was within a political boundary or a boundary. So think about all of that and how that was a vital source of information, and it's not really around anymore. That phone book data is now geo-enabled. We can explore with our phone or the internet that same information. And so now that it's geo-enabled, we could actually see where everyone with the same last name lives. But more importantly, now that it's geo-enabled, we can ask questions. So if I wanted to know how many recycling centers are near me, or on my way to work, where are the nearest clothing drop boxes? Which post office is closest to me? In my case, it's not the post office that my zip code belongs to. It's a different post office. So just, getting that spatial context and asking questions. And taking it a step further, what really makes it powerful is we're able to share that information and engage with others. So think about that business directory in the back of the phone book. Now we're able to see reviews online or go to Yelp and see photos of the food, see reviews and experiences that people are having. So really that integration of all of that information and that experience is what makes geo-enabling information powerful. So I really encourage everyone to geo-enable their data or their information, because just about everything has some sort of geographic context. So again, it's not just about displaying data on a map. It's how we integrate that data, collect the data, interact with it, analyze it, and share it. So the phone book is one example, but really there's data everywhere. For example, you can collect information in a community on damage assessments if you're recovering from a storm, plotting all of the damages on a map, attaching photos to that and sharing that out with public officials or with the public if needed, overlaying that information with parcel data or floodplain data and getting that holistic picture of what's occurring. There's data needed to manage and monitor building permits throughout a town. So where are you issuing your building permits? Where are the inspections occurring? When are they occurring? Was it a pass or fail? And which building permits are about to expire? So there's also data needed to manage an MS4 program in a community. So you need to know where all of your stormwater outfalls are, have a plan so that those are routinely being inspected and keep accurate records of that you can easily retrieve, and also engage the public in those efforts. So really it is the platform that we all can't live without. It's the way of communicating and making informed decisions with data. So GIS has come a long way. And here at Dawood, our GIS team is, constantly developing tools for non-GIS people to use on a daily basis. So what I'd like to share now is a great example of how we geo-enable data for land use planning projects. And this one in particular took place in Massachusetts. Let me share my screen. Okay, so what we're looking at here is a story map. And a story map is a web-based GIS application. And we're looking at it now through a web browser, but you can also view it on your phone or on a tablet, anywhere that you have cell or Wi-Fi coverage, so you can look at this in the field as well. And it's a way to combine a lot of content to tell a story. So we can combine maps, visuals, videos, all sorts of things to really tell a compelling story and make something that's maybe difficult to digest or understand in written format, make it come alive with a story map. So this story map was created to supplement an RFP, so a lot of text. And this is representing Union Point, which is the former Navy base in Massachusetts that's currently going through a redevelopment process. So the current developer had created an RFP for master planning and real estate development, and we created this story map to go along with that RFP so that prospective bidders could see just how complex this site was, so or is. So it details all sorts of things: infrastructure, zoning, public and protected lands, and really just help to present and organize very confusing data in one location, just making it easier to consume for planning and decision making. So I'll walk through the 6 tabs here on the top of all of the content for the story map. This first one provides a land use overview of Union Point. And as we scroll through it, and I'll try and go slow, I know there might be some lag here. The first slide is showing just a breakdown of the land use, and Union Point encompasses 3 towns: Weymouth, Abington, and Rockland. And then we've segmented Union Point so that you could see how all of the properties fit together, starting with this color in magenta. These are all of the existing and improved subdivisions, and black being all of the existing roads. Keep in mind that the imagery underneath is not a current reflection of what's out there right now. It is the data. And as we continue to scroll, you'll see that blue fills in. Blue is representing all of the Coast Guard land. And then these two colors that just appeared represent the Navy land, that's in gold. And then this yellow color is Navy land that will eventually be conveyed to the master developer. So these are optional, these are options for the redevelopment process. Continuing on, the green is managed by Washington Capital. So they're the ones that are looking to develop the land. So all of the green space is available for that, including the orange also. And then the rest of the land is open space. So really just showing you in a informative and easy to understand way, just the lay of the land and how it's all subdivided. The next tab is not a story map, it's an interactive map. So this is a good example of just another type of technology that can be incorporated here to tell the story. So with this map, we have the ability to see a legend over on the left, turn layers on and off, and also zoom in. So you have complete control over what you're looking at, the scale of the map. You can even come down here and change the background if you wanted to look at the imagery or other background features as well. And then embedded information from that RFP. So, keep in mind the RFP was very lengthy, a lot of text, a lot of good information, but we supplemented it with this and pulled out some of the important tables from the RFP. So here's a table that outlines the, all of the vertical development. So just quick reference for the bidders. And as you can see on the map here, the current state of vertical development is divided into three colors, purple being residential, red being commercial, and blue being mixed use. So this gives a current snapshot of where they are with development. And then moving on to the future development opportunities, just really trying to break it down for the bidders of where they're looking to develop. So pink is developed land, and then keeping the same colors from the land use overview, green is that Washington Capital land, and the yellow is what's going to be conveyed by the Navy. So also an option for development. And it's just a lot of moving parts. We've been involved in this project for over 20 years, and you can even see here that this roadway is Navy land that's still to be conveyed. So there were just a lot of complexities here that the story map really helps to illustrate. Another tab is zoning. Zoning's especially important when planning for a development. So we have all of the different zoning categories here, and you can overlay information such as where that Washington Capital land is and where the Navy land. So I won't go into too much detail, but it's just a great way of combining all of those complexities. Here's the open space and just showing you where the recreational trails are. And being a former Navy base, there are a lot of areas that needed to be remediated that were Superfund sites. So just have more information in here, kind of explaining the background of the remediation process, where it occurred, which areas needed to be remediated, and the current status of that. So that's one example of how to supplement a traditional product with an engaging format, this being a story map. So just think of other ways that you might be able to do this to really get your information out there in a clear and easy to digest way. Another example could be to take your comprehensive plan and put that into a story map so that you're able to visualize just what the vision is for your community.
Jody, this is a great project-specific example of how we've used these tools. I'd like to turn the discussion over to Tim now and talk about more day-to-day services, things like EMS and road construction. Tim, could you share some examples of how we're using GIS tools to map and plan for those types of daily services?
Yep, thanks, Jim. So as we all know, EMS is really important, and it's on top of that, it's important that they are prepared to respond efficiently under any situation that may arise. They need to understand things like how construction, parade routes, weather, flooding, and that sort of thing might affect their response. You never know what might happen on any given day, and you need to be able to adapt to changing conditions during those emergencies. So this was the case for Swatara Township, where there was a multi-year road construction project that was going to take place. The Pennsylvania DOT's I-83 Capital Beltway project was proposed major changes to the interchanges that bisect the town of Swatara. There was a plan to widen the highway and totally reconfigure the interchanges with 283 and 322. Along with the highway reconfiguration, the local roads were planned to be altered as well. There was going to be new connector roads and bridges that would be built first, and then the highway reconfiguration would come through. So you can see those new bridges and connector roads shown on the map here as the darker black lines. So for our study, we mainly focused on these local roads and not the highway itself. So our project kind of kicked off when the fire chief came to us and asked if we could model their current conditions and the future conditions to kind of get a head start on the planning and get a good idea of what the construction would actually do to them. We didn't really have an obvious solution for this at first, so we reached out to our new business partner, Esri, for some help. Didn't have an out-of-the-box solution right away, but they suggested StreetMap Premium and specifically the custom roads extension that lets you edit existing road networks. With that software, we were able to create a custom road network by drafting in those new bridges and connector roads, and also closing off some of the roads that would no longer exist after that construction. With that custom road network, we were able to model the after conditions and use a standard network to map their current conditions. The cool thing about that is that Esri actually told us that we were the first real case of someone using that software to model future conditions. It was mainly previously used in the energy sector for adding things like access roads and private roads to facilities and being able to route those. So that was cool to be able to pilot something new. But with that custom road network set up, we were able to create service areas for their four fire stations to get a good idea of what their drive distances and drive times would be for both scenarios. Once we had these service areas set up for each of the stations, we were able to compare, and with doing that, we were able to see which neighborhoods would see improved responses and which would be negatively affected by that construction. So with that information in hand, the fire chief had all the resources needed to better plan routes for those emergencies and more efficiently staff each of those fire stations. So we ended up creating a lot of maps in this project, and a lot of them showed some really stark break lines at the different intervals, which you can see in the maps between the green, yellow, and red. These were mainly geared just for the fire chief, as he mainly wanted to see these three specific intervals, but we wanted to create something that was a little bit more geared toward the public and better for discussion. So we went through a cartographic technique to hexagon bin all of this analysis data to create a more appealing product, which you can see here. So this process mainly generalizes the data across the entire township, so there weren't those harsh breaks in between the intervals. This way, so like if there were neighbors that were right on the edge of an interval, it wouldn't seem like there was a drastic difference between them. So kind of smoothed out all the data, made it a little bit more visually appealing, and made it a little bit easier to digest for a regular person. This map ended up becoming the preferred style for the fire chief when addressing the public or talking with colleagues and other staff and talking about the entire project. But to address that second part of your question about construction, we are currently using GIS to track progress along a construction project on Dairy Street in Swatera also. The project's about a 1.5 mile road construction and storm drainage replacement project that Dawood designed, bid, and is performing the construction inspection and management for. With this construction inspection, we have a field inspector that has to go out every day and submit daily reports that have the number of crews, number of people per crew, the weather, the amount of hours worked, and the amount of hours that were negatively affected by weather. They also have to track things like observations for utility conflict, damage to utilities, and other design changes. On top of all of that, they also have to track quantities for both roadway and stormwater. And all of these quantities have to be tracked daily, since that's how the project was bid, and they are by each unit. And so we really have to closely monitor these so we can see when we get close to that limit or go over. So we wanted to develop a workflow that would replace and geo-enable this pen and paper based workflow. Their existing workflow left a lot of room for regular errors, just human errors for tracking those quantities. It was really hard to attach photos. You ended up with some really cumbersome spreadsheets, and overall it's just a really manual process to track. So we wanted to provide them with an efficient way to relay information back and forth between staff and create discussion between our crews, the field staff, our internal staff, and with that client. So to do that, we utilized a handful of ESRI products in our workflow, such as Survey 123, Story Maps, and the observation dashboards, which you could see here. We replaced a paper form that you'd bring with you out in the field with a Survey 123 form on a smart device. And when that form and submission was submitted, it would get sent back to the office in real time and displayed in a dashboard and story map like this here. So this reduced a lot of the manual effort in attaching pictures, filling out spreadsheets, and tracking the whole thing, which I'd like to give you a demo of how we set that up now. Let me share my screen. So here, this is an example of one of the Survey 123 forms that we set up for the quantity specifically. It has some general questions like location, date and time, the stationing along the route, direction, and then it gets into some more specific things like the project type, either stormwater or roadway, and then either quantity line item or summary line item. These questions have some conditional formatting built in, since we did have a little over 50 line items that we did have to track every single day. So to break that down and make that a little less overbearing, we built in some questions to filter some of them out. So these were all based off PennDOT 408 sections. So they'd come in and choose something like earthwork, and then they would have a list of just the earthwork. So they didn't have to filter through things that they wouldn't need. And then the big question was this total unit quantity used. So since we did have to track each individual item, this was letting us know how much was actually used. So for example, if they're installing pipe, they would list the actual linear footage of pipe installed. And after that, they have some general notes and as many photo questions as I need. So they could attach pictures of what was being installed or removed, so we can kind of get a screenshot in time of what was going on. So then once that was submitted, all of that data would come into one feature service and displayed in this dashboard here. So this is what all of our office staff would look at, what our project managers would look at, and really breaks down each quantity that we would have to track. So this project is just starting to get kicked off, so not every quantity has been used, so that's what these node data are for. We built in some functionality to color code the values, so we have an idea of where we are with our budget for each item. So if we're less than half, it's green, like here. If we're over half, it turns yellow. And then if we're at 100% or over, it does turn red. On top of that, if we want to see when something was submitted, so for instance, these test bits, we can scroll through this list here and actually see when they took test bits. Some of this is some test data, so we could get a good view, but a lot of this has started to actually be collected. The nice thing about these dashboards is that it's a great way for everyone in the project to see our progress. It promotes some discussion between groups, and if we do share this with the client, promotes great transparency so they can see real time how we're doing, they can see what we've done, and really just shows the quality of work that we're doing and that we are tracking everything that we need to.
Thanks, Tim. Those are great examples of how we're using these tools to support our clients and work alongside our clients' staff. Jody, I have a question for you about some of the things that Tim was sharing and that you did as well. Are these third-party apps, or are these things that you have to pay more for as an Esri subscriber?
So no, they're not additional cost, typically. Most municipalities already have access to these tools. They just might not realize it. Esri went through a restructuring process over the past year or so with their software offerings, and now all of these online tools are directly integrated into the desktop solutions. So if you have a license of ArcMap or ArcGIS Desktop, you also have access to these tools. Now, there may be an additional cost on how you use the tools and if you want to invite more users into it. But to get started, most people are just unaware that they have access to it. And since they're unaware, we actually see a lot of towns paying for third-party software to do things that these online tools could do. So it is our job as the Esri business partners to spread this awareness and help customers really unlock the value of the GIS investment that they're making.
All right, thanks, Jody. And thank you, Tim, for walking us through some of those examples. John, I'd like to turn it back to you now and kind of do a bit of a forward-looking question here, both near-term and longer-term. What do you see as innovations in GIS and mapping as it relates to planning, specifically for things like we're going through right now related to, say, disaster recovery and also the COVID-19 crisis?
Sure, Jim. There's really two parts to that question that you asked. The first one is under normal disasters, such as what we're going to see down in the Gulf Coast in the coming days with Hurricane Laura, where you see flooding and wind damage and even some of the fire damages that occur out in California currently. When you look at that type of damage, it's really important for communities to be able to understand the areas that have been impacted by that disaster and really begin to develop a set of quantifiable data of what the impacts may be. So it'll be important to be able to understand that and understand what types of uses have been impacted, what types of public infrastructure has been impacted, what the values of all of those are, and so that you could really chart the course moving forward to be able to either dedicate the revenue at the local level or be able to access some of the emergency available emergency funding that could help with the overall recovery from that. As it relates to COVID-19, this is a complete different disaster. It is not like some of those other disasters. And so communities may be interested in utilizing geospatial technologies and being able to display information such as where have there been reported cases of COVID-19 so that people know geographically in the community maybe where those are at. We certainly wouldn't want to have that down to the point of being at 123 Main Street, but understanding general geographic locations of where there may be some concerns could be important for the community to understand maybe where testing sites need to be or some other mitigation strategies might need to occur. But the other avenue is really important outside of the health end of this is what the impacts are going to be from an economic perspective. When you look at this disaster, and we're unfortunately only 6 months into it, it sounds as though we probably have another 6 months here as we're moving through this. So, which is a little scary. Really starts to outline that there's going to be a dramatic impact in the economy. And so for communities, municipal governments, school districts, counties, and other authorities that rely upon things such as property taxes and other types of wage taxes to be able to help implement their projects, these could all be impacted. And I think understanding where those businesses are that may have unfortunately closed, or where there's been a reduction in workforce staff, is going to be important so that communities can understand where the impact's going to be hitting them when it comes to that type of revenue generation. In addition, we may see businesses, as they start to close, you could start to see vacant buildings, vacant restaurants, vacant offices there. You may see foreclosures in the residential housing market. That could all begin to impact the community. And being able to collect that data, analyze it, and display it in a geospatial environment is going to be really important when community officials need to start making some decisions as to what types of incentive programs may they be able to create to help offset some of these negative impacts from COVID-19. It also could be utilized to be able to make certain requests to the state and federal governments for disaster relief, so that they can help to, again, address some of these negative impacts as it relates to the economy. So it goes back to kind of what I originally had stated, and kind of Jody showed in that example, which is, really trying to get easily understood and digestible information and data so that people can understand really what these impacts are, and then the community can then take that data and start to make decisions as to how they could recover.
Thanks, John. Jody, do you have some comments on the closing question there about what we'll see in the future?
Yeah, so I think that generally the expectation now is that people want to see real-time data and they want to see it visualized on a map. And like John said, we're seeing that with the COVID-19 response. Many local government entities have easily stood up dashboards and interactive maps. And that's what we're referencing most often. And we're going to see it with election time as well. We're looking at results on a map in real time. So I think innovation is coming from the expectation changing, and also just more and more people realizing how powerful GIS is and taking advantage of the tools they already have, and really not being limited by anything but your imagination. A fellow business partner of ours, Lansdale Borough, they have some really incredible examples of how they're building GIS tools to support things that really don't have a geographic context. So IT tracking within their organization, or fleet maintenance, maintenance of all of their vehicles. You really are not limited at all with these tools. So I just see, the more and more widespread that they become, the more powerful it's going to be.
All right. Well, I want to thank the entire panel, John, Jody, and Tim, for your insights today and the examples that you've shared. So we've reached the conclusion of our prepared remarks, but we want to open things up to questions to the audience too. So certainly you can use the Q&A tab within this to ask your questions. And if there's something you prefer to discuss offline, we'll also share our contact information here so you can reach out to us individually or just directly to Dawood Engineering in the way that you were able to register for this event. So we've received a couple of questions. I'll start with the first one and certainly encourage anyone else that has one to make sure you send it our way through the Q&A tab. But Jody, I think this question would be best answered for you. And the question is, do we provide training and support for these types of topics and tools?
Yeah, absolutely. So we realize that there's a lot of municipalities and towns out there that don't have a robust GIS staff. And as consultants, we're here to help augment that in whatever capacity is needed, whether that be, additional manpower with staffing, training, coming in to do a needs assessment just to evaluate where you currently are and make a plan for where you want to go. So absolutely, we would be happy to talk to you more about how to provide training or support for this. And keep in mind too, a lot of these solutions are pretty easy and quick to implement. So it's not the type of investment that you really have to wait a long time to see some results. We can get things set up relatively quickly and get you start using these solutions.
All right. Another question here. This one's for you, John. Are there channels for funding available for these types of improvements?
Yes, Jim. There are various states and even the federal government will have from time to time money that may be available for various planning projects. And so thinking about ways that you can develop your planning documents from a community and making them more interactive through this certainly could be viable options for public funding that may be able to help offset some of the costs that you may have to incur to be able to move and develop some of these types of projects. From the disaster perspective, the answer is also yes. I think when you look at the way that the federal government has been responding to a lot of the federally declared disasters throughout the country over the last 10 or 15 years, the funding programs that they are providing to communities are all based on data and the collection of data as it relates to not only the impact from that specific disaster, but more importantly, what's called unmet needs. So it's different types of damages that have occurred that there has not been funding that has been able to be appropriated for through the normal channels. And so working to be able to develop those action plans, if you will, for that funding is important and required by a lot of the programs, and more importantly, reimbursable expense under some of the programs. So there are certainly some federal programs that if the government does appropriate for COVID-19 or future disasters, communities can take advantage of being able to utilize that so that they can collect, analyze, and report that type of data, and more importantly, monitor the successful implementation of their recovery programs.
All right. Thanks, John. Another question, I think this one is for you, Jody. What role do you see GIS playing with newer technologies, things like augmented reality, virtual reality, and wearable technology?
Oh, that's a good question. So I think that whole world is pretty exciting with how geography and GIS can be incorporated. Like I said earlier, geographic context is the expectation. So with AI or the virtual reality, which I've never used, but providing a visualization to your GIS data, whether that be looking at underground assets, so utilities. So before you actually dig a hole, if you have the right GIS data, being able to go out to your project and looking underground to see what you can't see, or visualizing your proposed assets, or after a disaster, if you wanted to see what it looked like beforehand. So just that expectation of being able to visualize and see things without having to impact anything. And I also see geographic context with gaming and with learning. We actually had a conversation with Jack Dangerman from Esri a couple weeks ago. I'm volunteering on the NERISA board of directors in New England, and we're putting a virtual conference on this October. But we talked to Jack about that, and he is really excited about the future of GIS and gaming, and how to learn about different areas by actually getting it, totally immersed in it. So I think there's a lot of exciting things that are coming.
Thanks, Jody. I think you raised some really important points too about the usage of this kind of data. First and foremost, it's important to have the data available in order to be able to integrate things like three-dimensional models. We talked about in our first session here at the beginning of this summer series. And that geospatial information provides a lot more context to something as simple as looking at a structural assessment of a bridge, or, as you mentioned, underground utilities, looking inside of a vault below a manhole entrance. Those kind of things will be the wave of the future, and they will be safety improvements and also process improvements that make our jobs better. They require the collection and verification of that important data too. So lots of interesting tools and lots of interesting problems for us all to work together on solving as it relates to public infrastructure. I want to make one more final call for questions here from the audience before we close up the discussion. But in the meantime, we'll share our contact information with you all too. So we certainly encourage you to reach out to any member of the panel. John, Jody, and Tim's emails are there. You can certainly contact me as well, or just reach out to marketing@dawood.cc, and we'll be glad to get your question on to the right person. And also certainly want to thank my colleagues for sharing their expertise today and the examples of what they're doing. Seeing no further questions, we'll wrap up this final in our summer series of webinars. We want to thank you all for attending. Hope you've enjoyed this. We hope it sparks some questions and ideas that you'd like to talk with us further about. And stay tuned for when we reestablish this with a new series of webinars and discussions here in the near future. So on behalf of everyone at Dawood Engineering, my name is Jim Rogers. I want to thank you all for participating today and wish you a happy and safe remainder of your day. Thank you, everyone.